Now, with the opportunities for growth thin on the ground, it comes as little surprise that Western policymakers and businesses are relying so heavily on countries like China. Some believe that wealthier Asian consumers with a growing appetite for goods and services can put the global economy back on track. But Chandran Nair calls that view blinkered and irrational. His new book, Consumptionomics, warns that it could lead to environmental and political catastrophe. Well, he joins me now. Thank you very much for joining me. I mean, it's a very interesting idea because very often, particularly in the West, there is this concept that it is the growing middle classes in India and China that are going to lead the world, if you like, out of recession by simply doing what the West has been doing for generations, buying things. Why does that premise not work for you?
I think the simple answer to that is there's just far too many of us Asians. And I don't think you need to be a rocket scientist to understand that 4 to 5 billion Asians in the year 2050 consuming like the Westerners, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, it's completely an unsustainable path. And I think we're absolutely in denial when on the one hand we talk about things like climate change, etc., where the root cause is clearly the fact that we live in a fossil fuel economy and consumption essentially just raises all the emissions. And on the other hand, ask the most populated region in the world to start consuming like everybody else. The sums just don't add up.
It's the scale of it, isn't it? And that's maybe what the world hasn't quite woken up to, that a small middle class growing in India is an exciting prospect for Western and Indian businesses. The huge middle class that there will be in 20 years' time does pose real problems. I mean, if we look at something like the rare earths that have created a problem at the moment, you know, where does that go in 10, 15 years?
I mean, just for example, just take cars, for example. I mean, China is already the world's largest car market. Currently, Chinese car ownership is about 120, 130, if you depending on how you count it, per 1,000 people. OECD, it's about 750. India, it's about 30. Indians haven't even started driving. Yet every car company is saying, hey, let's get those Indians and Chinese. And I'm not even mentioning the Indonesians, the Vietnamese, etc. The estimates are that if the Chinese, Indians, etc., drive like Europeans or Americans, there'll be something like 1.5 billion cars just in those two countries. These are unfathomable numbers. Where will the oil come from? And all the talk about green cars, I mean, these are going to be toys for the rich. We don't have the rare earths to make the batteries, etc., to produce these hybrid cars.
So where do we go from here? Because this is going to take some major decisions and some big brakes to be put on at a time when that doesn't seem to be something the West wants to do right now.
I think this is right. And my argument in the book is that whilst Western economic consumption-led growth has in many ways made the world a great place and a better place, it's time to think afresh. The sort of decisions that will be taking place, particularly in Beijing, New Delhi, Jakarta, will shape the world. It will shape how people live in the West as well.
Yes.
And it's very important, therefore, that the political leaders in Asia start to have a very honest discussion with their populace about how the future will look like. This is not to suggest that people will necessarily be poor, and their book argues that this is not about accepting that the future is being very bleak. It will be redefining what we mean by wealth creation or prosperity. But I would argue, and I'm being a bit blunt here, that the right to car ownership is not a human right necessarily. There will be other ways that quality of life will be enhanced. Most of the most disenfranchised people in Asia, our lives are sort of degraded by the fact that we have too much of all of this stuff.
It is a fascinating concept, consumptionomics, to find out more. Chandran Nair, thank you very much indeed for joining us.